Hello and welcome to another session of Spring Boot, where I'm going to share with you the best practices of logging in a Spring Boot application. Now this is very important because Spring Boot is a production grade framework and we need to actually use the logging aspect very wisely so that it is very flexible and it does the job. So what I'm going to show you is how we can actually use the Spring profile to separate the logs for different profiles, how we can send logs of different profiles to different ends, like maybe to console and to Splunk or to some other places, and also how we can write JSON logs, and along with that, one of the tricks that I have learned in production, how we can change the log level dynamically. So without much talking, let's get started. Let's go to my GitHub repo, which is github.com/mshomik78 and then hireable code.java, and from there please go to the branch Spring Boot logging demo, Spring Boot logging. This is the branch, and if you go to the branch, then as always the instructions are very clearly written here, so you can follow the instruction and clone the branch locally and then can create the package and then can run it. So I have already cloned it locally and I'm going to show from my IntelliJ. So this is the project in IntelliJ. Now before I run the project and show the demo, let me show you a few things. Number one is, in order to configure logging in Spring Boot, normally we do not need any additional dependencies apart from Spring Boot Starter Web, basically. So all these additional dependencies that you are seeing here are for some special purpose. So if you just want to implement pure logging in Spring Boot, then you can do it with just Spring Boot Starter Web, because it also contains the Spring Boot Starter logging dependency, which has logback. Now first is you can configure the logging aspects, the logging properties in application YAML or in application properties, but I would strongly recommend not to do that. I would strongly recommend to actually create a file by the name logback-spring.xml and use everything related to logging, or configure everything related to logging here, because this is a separation of concern. Anything related to logging should be here. So that is one. And second is, as you can see in logback-spring.xml, we can actually configure logging based on the profile. So here I have actually mentioned that if the profile is local, then simply log to stdout, and stdout is an appender, which is basically a console appender. And if it is not local, which is basically targeted towards production, then log to a file by this name, then log to a file, and then I'm using a rolling file appender, and then the name of the log file would be hireable-coded.log. You can of course change the log file name, and then there would be a pattern, and then max file size and total size, max history, etc. And then this is the pattern. And also I have configured here that in non-local environment I would only log error, so I would not log anything below error. So debug info will not be, debug info and even warning will not be logged. Only error will be logged. So this is the configuration of logback-spring.xml file, and next is, if you go to the basic controller, you will see that it's a very simple controller, it's a very simple endpoint, and when this endpoint is invoked, then I have an info level logging, and then I have an error level logging. And as you can understand that in production, since I have only configured error, only this line will appear in production, and in local environment, since all lines will be logged, then both these lines will be logged. By the way, this is not an error, but this is just a demonstration of how we can configure info and error level logging. So now I'm going to actually run the application, but what you need to do is you first need to create the package of the application. So first I'm going to run it in non-local mode. So now the application is running, so has written that it is attaching appender named file rolling to root logger, which means everything will be logged in this file. Sorry, this file was already pre-created by me, so there were some lines. I think I can also delete those lines. Yes. So now I'm going to invoke the endpoint this endpoint maybe 5 times. So you will see that this error message appears in the log, because if you go to the basic controller, then you will see that this is the error message which is being logged, and the info is not logged because in logback-spring.xml I have configured that for non-local profiles we will log to the file. So it is logging to the file, and it is only logging error because it is also configured to only do error level logging. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the application and start it in local mode. So basically this will start the Spring Boot application in local profile. Okay. Now you will see that this log file will not be written. I can also in fact remove all contents from the log file, and then again I will start sending the request, and then you will see that it is logging to the console, because that is how it has been configured to log to the console, to log both the, so it is logging both the statements to the console, logging both info and error, because that is how I have configured the local mode, because the local mode is supposed to log in info mode, which means anything above info which is warning, error and info, everything will be logged. So that is how it is logging everything. So that's it. That's the basic part of it. Now, say for example, if we want to log in production, we want to log in JSON format in production, and that is something which is done nowadays, because we normally want to put the logs somewhere, maybe in ELK or maybe in MongoDB or somewhere, which is much easier to query if it is in JSON format. So in order to do that, let us go back to that logback XML. By the way, the name of this file should be logback-spring.xml. It should not be logback.xml. So if it is not logback-spring.xml, then Spring will not understand the concept of Spring profile. So if you go back to this file and you uncomment this encoder, which will encode the log in the JSON format, and I will comment the other encoder, and then I will again run the application. First I will have to again create the package. Because I have changed something, so I need to again recompile, recreate the package, and then I'm going to start the application in production mode, and then you will see that it will log in the JSON format. So now with this, it will start the application in non-local profile. Basically it will start in default profile, and if I make this requests again to the controller, you will see that hierablecoder.log file contains JSON response. Yes, so it contains JSON response. But this is also up to you. Like if it is required to actually log in JSON format, only then do this. Otherwise, you can always switch back to the default format. Now I'm going to show you another trick, which is the most interesting thing, which I have learned over time, where we can actually query the log level and dynamically change the log level in Spring Boot. So let's see how we can do that. So for that actually, so it is for that reason that I included this starter actuator package. So actuator is a dependency. If it is added to Spring Boot, then it actually exposes a lot of management related endpoints, and changing logging is basically done from one of those management related endpoints. So actuator helps us to manage Spring Boot application in production. So I also had actually added this part in application YAML, which means it will expose additional endpoints under actuator, which is the health and the loggers endpoint. So now let me again run that Spring Boot application in production. By the way, I think it is already running. So it is already running. So if we go here, and again, if we open the README, the instructions are very clear there. If we want to know what is the log level of this class, we can simply use this request, and so the affected log level is error, which means in this is non-profile, sorry, this is non-local profile, and in non-local profile by default we have configured to error level. Now we can change it back to info level dynamically for some time. Maybe in production there are some issues and we want to debug those issues in production, and that's why we want to change the log level dynamically to, say for example, info. So if we want to do that, we can do it something like this. So this is going to send a post request to that actuator endpoint, and it's going to dynamically change the log level. Now if you again do a get request to that same endpoint, the endpoint name is /actuator/loggers and then the full name of the class. Then you will see that the effective log level is info. Now if I am making some request, you will see even the info level request, even the info level logs will come. So let's go and see in this. So now you can see even the info level logs have appeared. Even the info level logs have appeared. So I think this is actually one of the most interesting or most useful technique which I learned in production, and by the way, there's also a best practice of using Spring Boot in production, that we can dynamically change the log level. So that's it. I hope you have liked the session, and if you really did like, and if you want such interesting videos, then consider subscribing to my channel, because that's also something which is going to motivate me.